So welcome everybody to another installment of My Jewish Story. I, of course, am the same person that you've seen on all of the videos. I'm Rabbi Goldstein, but to my, I guess as I'm looking at the screen to my left, but I guess it's to my right. You never understand what it is on this. But with me is Colleen Sandler, and Colleen, you were recommended. I'm not going to say by who. I don't want to give away names, but you recommended as a really interesting story, and I think that people have found these interviews to be really worthwhile and interesting and moving and inspiring, and I can't wait to hear a little bit about your personal story as well. So welcome, Colleen. Nice to have you.
Well, Rabbi Goldstein, firstly, I consider it a great honor that you're even interested in my story, and I thank you very much. And whoever recommended me, I thank that person too. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. See, that's perfect. That's just like shows just how,
yeah, well, it's
this
a really
is normal stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, gone. So that being said, Rabbi, I think you know that I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yeah.
And I actually came to this country in 1965, the 15th of January. I was already a married lady. I got married at the age of 21, and I married an American. And how that came about, maybe I will tell you during the next minutes that we chat.
Absolutely.
What I think you might be interested in is sort of the history of South Africa and the Jewish history of South Africa. And you know, South Africa still remains in my heart very, very much. I considered my childhood wonderful there. Childhood, growing up was pretty easy because my mom didn't have to work that hard. I mean, she had servants really. So my dad went to work, he played golf a lot, and my mom was really a mom. I have one sister, Jennifer, who's 7 years younger than me. So for 7 years, I was an only child. And my mom had actually fled Nazi Germany. My dad was first generation South African, which was pretty interesting. And I grew up happy, lots of friends, lots of immersion into Judaism. My parents did not keep a kosher home, but we certainly did have Shabbat every Friday night with the candles, the challah, which we called a kitka, by the way. And I was going to look up why we called it a kitka. There is absolutely a reason, K-I-T-K-E, but it's the only country in the world who called a challah a kitka.
So wait a minute, hold on. Let me ask you a couple questions. So first of all, you said your father was first generation South
Correct.
African, which means he was born there, but his parents were not. So where were your grandparents from? Your mom was, you said her family came from Europe, and she was a survivor of the Holocaust, right?
Exactly. My mom came, very interesting. My mom came in 1938. She was 26 years old. She came prior to Kristallnacht. Her father saw the writing on the wall and decided to bring his daughter to South Africa.
Wow.
The reason South Africa is, I made a couple notes, was because after, I want to get my facts correct, the Jews came mainly from Britain and Central Europe at the beginning. Johannesburg was founded in 1886, basically, because of gold. Gold was discovered in 1886, and it raised a lot of interest to people in Britain and Central Europe, and people emigrated to South Africa. So in 1938, my grandfather, living in Germany, knew things weren't good in Germany. He didn't know how to get rid of his business and to just absolutely liquidate and come to South Africa. So he decided to bring his only daughter to South Africa. which is what he did. And he deposited my mom in a small town outside Johannesburg. It was called Germiston. What could I compare it to? Not even as big as Columbia, a small town.
Mhm.
And he left my mom with a family with 4 daughters. I don't know how he knew them. My mom spoke no English. And he asked these, I don't know if he paid the family or if it was a friend, he asked that my mom be taken wherever the sisters go, you know, as a 5th sister. If they went shopping, she would go. If they went to a party, she would go. Anyway, so then he went back to Germany to get his wife and to close his business, which ultimately he did. This is not a story of them, but it was really a success story because he came back to South Africa. I'm not sure it was 39 or how long my mom was there alone, but he eventually opened a dress business just like he had in Germany. And he was really very successful. It was kind of funny because my grandmother was the businesswoman and he was just the kind man. And if somebody couldn't afford a dress, he would say, oh, take the dress. And my grandmother would say, no, I want the money. Anyway, so my mom, 26 years old, German, went one evening to a wedding with these 4 girls. And she was sitting on the side and a very nice, handsome gentleman came over to her and said, would you like to dance? So she got up and she danced with him. And then she went to sit down again. And 5 minutes later, he came back and he said, I'd like to have another dance. And she said, what's your name? And he said, my name is Ted Shapiro. And she was a little upset because her name was Shapiro, the German Shapiro, Shapira. And she thought he was joking. Anyway, she did dance again, and that's how I was born.
So where were your grandparents on your father's side from?
Very interesting. My father's side, there was at the beginning, Johannesburg in 1886, it was mainly people from Central Europe and from Britain who came to South Africa. There was a war in 1899 to 1902. And after the war, there was a huge influx of people from Lithuania. And the Jewish population in Johannesburg grew exponentially.
Wow.
So my grandfather's story is actually even more amazing than my mother's story. My grandpa, Charles Shapiro, and my grandma, Anna Shavel, Shavell, were 18 years old in Lithuania, and they decided to elope to South Africa. He told her there was gold in the streets and they would have a wonderful life, and they actually eloped at 18 to South Africa.
I don't even know what to, like, first of all, I can't imagine if my 18-year-old kid eloped to have, to the opposite side of the hemisphere, or even more. That I don't know how I would handle that. But 18, and how lucky from Lithuania, because it didn't get better for Jews in Lithuania. That's for sure.
They fled the pogroms.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, Rabbi, I left at 21, which I didn't elope, but it was just as hard, I imagine. Maybe not quite as hard as for my grandparents who came to Johannesburg. My grandfather, Charles, he actually looked like Omar Sharif. I have a picture of him. He was absolutely gorgeous. My grandma wasn't too bad either. One of my most precious possessions is their picture, which hangs in my entrance hall.
Oh my
Unfortunately, my grandpa Charles died at 40 in my father was 16, so 1928 he died. And my grandmother said, I had the very best. Why would I ever look for another man? And she never did. So she was the same age and she lived alone from the age of 40 till she died.
Wow. So maybe we should get closer to your parents, as opposed to, even though I would love to dwell on your grandparents. Let's talk about your parents were in in Johannesburg, and they met at this dance, and that's how you came around. And what
Right.
did your father do for a living?
My father had his father died when he was 16, and his father had a small business selling tires for cars. My father left school, obviously, at 16. He had to make a living for his mother and his sister. His sister had actually had polio, and she limped, and he always felt extremely sorry for my aunt, who was a wonderful lady, and she married and had a marvelous child, and everything was okay in her life. But he always felt responsible to send money to his mother and his sister monthly for his entire life, which is what he did.
Wow.
So he took the small tire business at the age of 16 and solicited the help of an older cousin or uncle, cousin maybe, and together they built a pretty major company. It was called Rand Spares and Accessories. And so he went from tires to selling car parts, everything for a car. And he had the entire area of South Africa. He had salesmen who went around the country selling parts to businesses, and they would come from my dad in Johannesburg. Johannesburg was a little metropolis. I mean, it wasn't quite New York, but it was amazing business, wonderful. My dad also he had a patent for something called mini badge. In South Africa, every single car in the 50s, I guess, 50s and 60s, had to have their license displayed on the windshield. And the license was round. And my father developed this patent for every single car on the market, Ford, Buick, Chevy, Dodge, whatever, and had a logo on a silver stainless steel, very pretty sort of flat cup that fit over the license and displayed it the correct way. And it was called mini badge, and everybody in Johannesburg drove around with a mini badge on their windshield. So that was kind of nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
But did he or your mom grow up more Orthodox and they became less, or were they always liberal in the way that?
Well, that's very interesting. I don't quite know how they decided on the Orthodox shul, but they did. They decided that they were going to be members of Walmerin Street Synagogue, which was the biggest synagogue in Johannesburg. It wasn't the first synagogue, it might have been the second synagogue, but it was so majestic and so beautiful, and they were married there. I can't remember which rabbi. It could have been, it wasn't Rabbi Rabinovitz, it was the rabbi prior to him, because Rabinovitz was there when it was my year. I think I did make a note of who it was. I think it was Rabbi Landau, yes, because Rabbi Rabinovitz succeeded him in 1945, and my parents were probably married in 39 or 40. So we were members of Orthodox. However, when I turned 5 or 6, this is, you won't believe this story, but my parents decided I had to go to Hebrew school, mainly because even though I was raised Jewish, my mother thought that I was ready for school at 5. Don't ask me why, but I was ready. So nobody would accept me because the cutoff, my birthday was March, the cutoff was, I don't know, December or September, and so they wouldn't accept me. So my mother applied at a Catholic convent, and I went to a convent, Catholic convent, till I was 12 years old.
Really?
Really. Very strange, but
because they would let you into kindergarten at your age, early.
I'm sorry?
Only because they would admit you earlier, right. You be the youngest student, and they would admit you.
Exactly. I mean, I never really asked my mom. You know, my mom was very secretive. People who came from Germany, many of them did not tell their whole story. And even to us, she didn't tell the whole story.
Right.
But it was very important to her that I go to school early. And actually, it wasn't such a great thing because I graduated, I matriculated at 16. And even though intellectually and educationally, I had passed everything I needed to, socially, I was really a baby. I mean, I went to university at 16 with people who were 17 and 18, and there was a big difference.
I went to university when I was 17, and I thought I was the youngest one there.
Right.
My birthday was November. The cutoff normally was September, but where I was, it was December. So I made the cutoff, but I was 17. And so I felt young. I can't imagine what 16 would be like.
Yeah, it was pretty
Too young.
ridiculous.
Too young.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
By the way, I never lived at university. My father drove me to university every day. He had a handle on me wherever I was. He ruled with an iron fist.
Because you didn't even have a driver's license yet.
Hmm?
It's because you didn't even have a driver's license yet.
Oh no, I didn't. I actually never got a driver's license in South Africa.
Wow.
Because I don't know if you had to be 21 at that time to get one, but I was already married, and I left. I got my driver's license in America. It's the very, very, very first thing I did. I couldn't wait to drive because my mom actually had a driver all her life, and I hated that so much, and nobody was ever going to know exactly where I was. So I decided I needed a license.
Let's talk about growing up. I mean, so your family had a driver, your mom really did. I mean, so obviously your father's business was very lucrative.
Rabbi, my father's business was lucrative, but you have to remember in Johannesburg in the 1940s and 50s, you didn't really need that much money to live really well. I mean, look, I wasn't making the money, and I'm not exactly sure, but I know that, I mean, my parents never lived in a house. They didn't want a house. My mother did not want a house. She wanted an apartment. And that's what we lived in all my life. My very first house was in Potomac, Maryland, after I was married and already had a child. First house I ever lived in. But in the apartment, my mother did employ, I will call him a gentleman because I can't use the word that was used then. Well, I will tell you, it was called a boy, which
is terrible, I understand, but that's
horrible.
A different time, and I understand
Different
you're not
time.
supporting it, right?
Right. I'm not supporting it at all. But anyway, so this man cleaned her floors. Then she had a lady in the kitchen whose name was Priscilla. She was like my second mother. I adored her. My mother would make the shopping list, or she would make, I think Priscilla made the shopping list. And then my mother went with her car and her driver, Edward, who I loved also. He was a wonderful companion to my dad, but more so to me. I mean, he loved me and he drove me and whatever. Wow. So my mom had Priscilla in the kitchen. She had Edward as the driver. She had the guy who cleaned her floors, whose name I don't really know. And on occasion, she had a washerwoman because we did not have a washer and dryer. So the washerwoman came and washed on a board in the bathtub, and I still remember that.
What an unbelievable, I mean, and again, it's just an unbelievable part of history too. It's like a blend of your life. I mean, I still want to ask you more about the Jewish stuff, but also history and the recognition of what was happening in Johannesburg at the time. And wow. But
Rabbi, may I just tell you one thing? My mom, having immigrated, was not truly like a South African woman. Right. And I'm not saying anything bad about South African women, but they were even lazier.
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't say this because I grew up loving, I mean, I had aunts that I adored and mothers of my girlfriends, et cetera, but life was easy. And, people who lived in houses, like my sister married into a family who I absolutely loved, but they lived in a house and they had 7 servants. Jeez.
7 servants.
And where we went back for some event, and my sister's parents were not going to be there, and they offered my husband and I their house so that we didn't have to stay in a hotel. The only thing I had to do was instruct the 7 servants what to do. And I said to my husband, I'd been in America for a few years already. I said, there's not a chance I'm going there if I have to worry about telling 7 people what their duties are. I want to stay in a hotel, and we did. So we never stayed in a house.
Right. That is
yeah.
incredible.
I will just tell you one more thing, like the dining room, when you sat in your dining room, not my mom would say to my sister and I, get up and take the stuff to the kitchen so that Priscilla can wash. You never know what you'll have to do in life. That's what my mother always said.
And she's right.
She was right. But many of my girlfriends, their parents never got up from the dinner table. There was a button underneath the wife's foot at the table. And miraculously, when you finished the first course, the next course was brought out from the kitchen. And then it was cleared, and then the next course came out. And, you know, if you didn't know there was a button that rang in the kitchen, you didn't know how this miraculous next course was served.
You know, it's funny, in my house growing up in New Orleans, I mean, we never had servants, but we had a button.
Oh, you did?
We had a button on the floor too.
Wow. And so what was that purpose for?
Well, for clearly the people who owned prior to us or prior to them used it, but not us. But I know about the button. I'm familiar with the button.
Okay. So, you know.
It's incredible. So tell me about, tell me more about being Jewish in South Africa. What was, I mean, so yeah, there was obviously the Orthodox synagogue, and of course remembering that it's not like Reform Judaism is a relatively new thing. I mean, in America it was from 1880.
Correct.
And so, and it really took root in America, even though its foundations are in Germany. It took root in America. I mean, so I don't know if it got to South Africa much earlier than, or right around the time that you were growing up is when it maybe emerged. So tell me, what was Judaism?
You're completely correct, Rabbi, completely correct. I believe 1945 was the very first reform movement in Johannesburg. But the reason I mentioned the Catholic school was because it was very important to my mother that I went to Hebrew school at 5, because I was going to the Catholic school for education.
Right.
So their shul, Walmerin Street, which any South African, I don't know, in our congregation or whoever hears this will remember, had cheder, but they had it 5 days a week. So at 5 or 6, I had to go every single day after school. And I was pretty feisty even at that age. And I said, I'm not doing that. I said, you know I'm Jewish and I'm happy, I want to be Jewish, but I'm not going to Hebrew school every day. Not going.
Wow.
So I guess my mother and father discussed it. And by that time, the Reform congregation had started. And so they joined Reform. So they were now members of Orthodox and Reform. And the reason they were members of Reform was only so that I could go to Hebrew school twice a week, which is what I did.
That is great.
So I'm going to look at my notes, because I think it's important that you know a little bit. You know about Walmerin Street, of course. You know that Rabbi Landau was the first rabbi in 1903.
Do you remember any public celebrations of Judaism in Johannesburg?
Public celebrations. Well, I mean, the Zionist movement started very early, and people always were very interested in Israel and always gave money to Israel. But I don't really remember. My parents were not, they were not antagonists, or they just lived very calmly. They weren't going to go to any display of against race or any Jewish displays. It was sufficient for them to raise their children in a Jewish home and to do the customs that were necessary to do.
And especially if you have, a relatively vivid memory or connection with, with Germany, I mean, Lithuania to a degree. I mean, that was a generation off. But the point being is that, like there's an instinct to just kind of keep quiet and not make up, because you never know who that person is next to you, who your next door neighbor is, what that person is thinking about, or what their instincts are. So the Jewish instinct is to just be a little cautious with everything that you do.
Rabbi, you understand completely. You're so knowledgeable, so you know exactly, and that's exactly what was with my mother. My father was far more outgoing, but not my mother.
Right.
In fact, South Africa was a lot like England, and we had a dear neighbor on our same floor, and my mother was very friendly with, and her name was Mrs. Jones, and I don't think I ever knew her first name. And my mother called her Mrs. Jones. So, very sort of formal, you know.
Right.
But I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. I mean, I was happy.
And do you remember any like were there any type of foods, unusual foods perhaps that was specific to South Africa that maybe that we don't know, or are there regional kind of foods, Jewish foods there that people that I would like to hear about?
Well, it's a good question. My most favorite food was biltong, and that was because, yes, it was dried meat. And my father's salesman who went in would always bring back biltong for me because they knew how much I loved it. Mm-hmm. It was probably deer, or it could have been beef. I'm not quite sure what animal it came from, but as long as it wasn't cured too long, I loved it. It had to be raw. So the salesmen who were traveling and may not be home for 2 weeks would buy it the last day before they came home, so that it was it was raw for Ted Shapiro's daughter. So that was my very, very favorite thing. It still is. And there are a couple of places, 1-800-Biltong and Bull and Cleaver, that sell in America. But in order to observe the USDA, they can't send it raw. It has to be sort of quite dry. So I don't really. What
about Jewish foods? Like I think it was, you said kipta was challah, the way they call challah, but still it was challah. But were there any other foods like you remember? Like if you were at Passover Seder, what might you see on the table? Would it just be what you would expect here, or might there be anything different on the table?
No, I think it was very much like what you would expect here. I mean, my parents weren't overly Jewish. I don't know how I can explain it, but I mean, my mother wasn't like cooking in the kitchen all the time. I mean, we served brisket. There was always 4 courses at dinner, and even Pesach or anything, we sat down, we had hors d'oeuvres, then we had soup, then we might have had meat or fish, and then we had dessert. And as I said before, my father made quite sure that my sister and I remained for the entire meal, even though if we had a date, it didn't matter. We had to finish the meal. And my father spoke a lot, and we couldn't wait for dinner to be over so we could continue with our evening. But anyway, he ran a pretty strong.
Right. No, so I get like sometimes people, especially in Mediterranean countries, they talk about kind of unique foods that were specific, Jewish foods were specific. Maybe South Africa, it was just too first world. It was
No, but we did have something, wasn't really particularly Jewish, but it was called a braaivleis, which is a barbecue. And the weather in South Africa is always lovely. So winter, summer, whatever, you would cook outside, and you would have boerewors, which is farmer's sausage. And I can't say that what it had in it, because I don't really know what it had in it. But I can tell you it wasn't kosher, but people loved it. And so all South Africans grew up with boerewors. We had certain delicacies like cook sisters, which were like donuts, but they were twisted, and they were very South African. My father had a drawer of chocolates, and every night, he was very disciplined. He would take 2 chocolates, 2 little pieces, and he would offer us 2 little pieces. And that was our dessert, and after whatever my mother made a dinner, and then he would lock the drawer again, and we never knew where the key was until the following night when he gave us 2 more pieces. So you can imagine when I told my father that I wanted to marry an American at 21, he was not too thrilled.
Because you would have a chocolate availability as much as you want.
That was the least of his worries.
I know.
But anyway, I do want you to know that in 1969, Well, now let me go back to that. So there were a lot, in 2005, there were 33 Orthodox shuls. There were 3 Reform shuls, and there was only 1 conservative shul. So conservatism really didn't take off in South Africa.
Right.
However, there were 18 Hebrew nursery schools, and there was a school like the Jewish Day School called King David Primary, and they also had 2 high schools. And in 2001, the total enrollment in King David was 3,300 kids. When I met my husband in 1964, there were 1 million people in Johannesburg, and there were 55,000 Jews. But those 55,000 really hung together. I mean, I actually was not allowed to date anybody who wasn't Jewish.
Wow. But
So
55,000 out of 1 million, that's 5%. I mean, that's
significant.
yeah, I mean, compared to America, that's like it's the
Very
shtetl
significant.
in South Africa, in Johannesburg.
Very significant. By the way, I want to say that my best friend became the principal of King David High School, which was pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
I also want you to know the Hebrew Hadisha was very important in Johannesburg. It was founded in 1887, the Jewish Burial Society. And there was a Jewish orphanage and 2 Jewish old aged homes called Our Parents' Home and Sandringham Gardens. And then there was the Selwyn Siegel Home, which opened in 1959, and that was for the Jewish handicapped. And the important thing, I think, to also mention here is the Jewish community in South Africa is not to be measured merely in terms of numerical strength, but it really in terms of its intensity of Jewish life and identity and its really strong Zionist devotion.
Wow.
Zionist devotion.
Well, it feels that way.
Yes.
I mean, and I don't think, I mean, thanks for saying that, but I mean, I really get that sense. Although I do also sense that I mean, the numbers are impressive. 55,000 Jews in a community is a big, I mean, it's not New York City, but what is? But I mean, but that's a huge Jewish community. And that's what it was when you were living there.
Yes.
Is it the same now, to the best of your knowledge?
You know, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I left, I think it's significantly less actually, because I left in 1965 or 4, actually. I honeymooned in Europe for 2 weeks. When I left, that was the numbers. However, during the apartheid period, which came later, many poorer people were forced out of the cities, and they actually established accommodation in the suburbs, which was not comfortable for the white population in those suburbs. And they decided to actually leave South Africa. And although I was a chalutzim, a pioneer in my move so early in 64, I would say by the 80s or even before, there was a massive leaving South Africa for Israel, for Canada, for America, for Australia. There was actually a quota for America. People weren't allowed in. And the funny story is my grandmother, Anna's youngest brother, was actually 93 years old before he received the quota to come to this country. Mm-hmm. And he came at 93 and he lived until he was 98 in America. Wow. But he wanted all his life to come to America and he couldn't come. So he could have gone to Canada, Australia, but not here. It
begs the question, do you feel as if there was a difference between, and the answer may be no, and I'm kind of like thinking the possibility, I mean, there's slight differences, but was there a difference between, in terms of the way that the Jews, now again, I know it's a little after your time, but Jews kind of experienced apartheid versus the way that the rest of the white community of South Africa experienced apartheid? Was like, were rabbis kind of preaching against it, and or was it kind of too awkward for people to even address?
I think Jews always have been more tolerant. Um, I don't think Jews tried to change things that much because it suited them the way life was. I mean,
Right.
they were actually very, very good to the people who worked for them, but they didn't really consider them, we know that they were servants.
Right.
They thought they had a job. I mean, my mother put Priscilla on a pension after she left, and she never worked again. She got a pension from my parents for the rest of her life. I think Jews have always been tolerant, and I don't think that the Jews were the ones. I think the Afrikaners hated, the Black people more.
Did the Black people recognize, and this, who knows if this is that, if there's any way to really know, do you think there was a recognition by the Black community in South Africa that the Jews kind of didn't share those same feelings that the Afrikaners did, or was it
No, I think they knew that. I really do. I think very much. I mean, they were very happy. It wasn't like, I noticed sadness ever. I mean, my nanny, Connie, she was wonderful. She actually was more my mother than my mother, although my mother was a wonderful mother, but she was, having tea with her girlfriends and running around, and Connie was with me all the time.
right?
And I think, if they could have suckled the Jewish children, they would have. I mean, we were very, very, very close to them. They were family.
Yeah.
They didn't happen to live in the same house.
Right.
But like if you lived in a house, there were servant quarters outside, which were not wonderful, but they were adequate. And of course, they ate all their meals in the main house. Living in an apartment, our servants lived upstairs.
Right.
And they would come to work at 7 in the morning or whatever time you were required, and they would leave in the afternoon and go and take a nap. They would go home to their families maybe twice a month because their children didn't come with them. They lived with their parents in their township. Life was so different, Rabbi. I mean, I tell you what saved white South Africa was the fact, we were outnumbered by the Blacks, maybe 12-1.
Right.
And if they'd ever decided to revolt against us, we would not have made it.
Right.
However, the Blacks, there were so many tribes who actually hated each other far more than they hated the whites.
Right.
And there was tremendous fighting between the Xhosas and the Zulus and the Sesotho's and Tembos, and
right.
Tremendous. And so for the most part, it was very calm. We didn't notice apartheid. We noticed segregation. I mean, we knew that the Black people, when my mom took me to the park, it had a sign that said whites only. And I mean, you had to be an ostrich if you didn't see that. Of course you saw it.
Right.
But somehow we didn't realize. We really didn't. We weren't mean and horrible people. We were just living our life the way it had befallen us.
Right. I understand. Oh, so interesting. Do you want to? Can we move to a new? Unless you have other thoughts, you don't want to forget something. Can we?
I just want to see. Well, you know how important Walmart Street Synagogue was to me, because I was married there with Rabbi Rabinovitz, and eventually, because of this major exodus of the Jews to different countries in the world, Walmart Street actually had to move out of the city, and it closed in 1994. It's now a church, but there are still remnants of a Jewish structure, including a Star of David on top of the building dome. So that was very significant to me.
Yeah, this is a story all across the world.
Yeah.
In which, I mean, sometimes sometimes synagogues close, but oftentimes synagogues just move, right? You started in the inner city, but over the years, the population grows and moves to the suburbs, and then the synagogue moves out to the suburbs and follows it. And then if you look, you see various different buildings in cities, and you say, wow, look, there's a Jewish star, look, there's the Ten Commandments, and now it's a church, so yeah, it's what you're saying is not unusual.
I think you probably passed 16th Street in Washington, D.C., where many of the shuls like B'nai Israel, Beth Shalom, or whatever, became churches, but they still have the Star of David.
That's
so
exactly
I
correct.
understand exactly what you're saying.
And there's nothing manifestly wrong with having a Ten Commandments emblem on the Star of David, maybe less so, but still. So there's a lot of, that story is very familiar to me. So tell me, so you got married.
Yeah, before we go to that, I just feel I would be remiss if I didn't mention Nelson Mandela.
Okay.
Because although this is the story of, the Jewish history, his story was just so amazing.
Yeah.
He was actually born very poor in a small village in the southeastern region of South Africa called the Transkei. His father was the chief of a village, and he was actually a member of the royal family of the Tembu tribe, and he spoke Xhosa, and that's with the click, like Miriam Makeba, the song? Right. Yeah, I could never do that, but, and he served as the first Black president, which was remarkable, from 1994 to 1999.
Right.
He was actually a lawyer, and he committed himself with the ANC to overthrow apartheid by sabotaging the government with a military group. And he was finally caught and imprisoned. And you know that he actually attempted to overthrow the state. So he was imprisoned for 27 years, and right. On Robben Island.
Right.
Actually, the president of South Africa, de Klerk, at that time in 1990, worked with Mandela he freed him from prison, de Klerk, and then they worked together to negotiate an end to apartheid, which resulted in an end in 1994. And there was a multiracial general election, and Mandela led the ANC to victory and became president. And in his reign, he always emphasized reconciliation between the country's racial groups. By the way, he also declined a second presidential term. And of course, during his reign, he won the Nobel Prize. So the country holds him in deep respect.
Yeah, he's probably one of the most extraordinary people, because he with so much anger and so much resentment that people were feeling when he became the president, he still preached and articulated and for peace and for love and unity, and not kind of divisiveness, which so easily could have been, that was what was floating around, and the fear of it. In fact, there was this extraordinary movie. Nelson Mandela could not have played himself better than Morgan Freeman played him in this movie called Invictus, which was all about the rugby and about how he used rugby to bring the country together. It was extraordinary. Really, I was so moved by it. I couldn't believe it.
One of my very favorite movies, absolutely. He was also given the nickname Mandiba, which meant father of the nation.
Right.
So
Mandiba, I remember them calling him Mandiba. No, but it was just so touching, but it was so thoughtful of him that he knew that if he really was going to create a legitimate nation that was going to be able to thrive and work, he could not take advantage of this new political power that he had. He really needed to take it carefully and slowly, and he did it. He
could have given lessons to many leaders in this world.
Yep, you are right.
including somebody who I will not mention right now. But
No need to. No need to. So can we only
Yeah.
because can we talk about a little bit about America and about what your experiences were like Jewishly in America, and how maybe your experiences in South Africa guided those American experiences, or if they were just your own new fresh ones having nothing to do with anything. Tell me a little bit about what it was like. You came
I'd
to,
be
came to
delighted
Washington.
to. I
What's
would
that?
be delighted to, because I will try to make this as quick as possible, but it's not that quick. I graduated from university with a degree in speech and drama. I had started doing logopedics, which is speech therapy, but I had to work with disabled children and it was very difficult for me. So I switched my major. When I graduated, my mom said, no daughter of mine will be on the stage, go get a job. Fine, okay. So I'm like 18, 19 maybe, and I go and I get a job in a travel agency. I told them I could speak many languages and they hired me. I did speak German, I did speak English, and of course I spoke Afrikaans because we were bilingual. I had to speak Afrikaans, which was a derivative of Dutch. It actually came to the country in 1652 with Jan van Riebeck, who came to South Africa looking for a route to India. And he came with his sailors who spoke this kitchen Dutch, which became Afrikaans. And we had a double negative, which is hilarious. Like in German or Dutch, if you want to say do not disturb, you say niet storen. In Afrikaans, it was moenie stuur nie. So a double negative, in case you didn't hear it the first time. So very ridiculous language. And when I lived in Holland for 3 years, around 1968, and I would try to speak Afrikaans to the Dutch, they would answer me in English because they thought it was such a funny language, which it was.
They would answer you in English because they couldn't even also, because the responding in your Afrikaans, Dutch was almost, and it was both hilarious and almost impossible because it was just a complete change from any language that they were familiar with.
Yes, that was all true. However, I did get them. After living there for 3 years, I was often asked, what part of Holland are you from? They knew I wasn't from Amsterdam or a high, but they thought maybe some little outlying whatever. But the Dutch are wonderful.
Bravo.
Anyway, I digress. So I went to work at African Car Hire and Trans-Africa Safaris. This was 1961 or 2, something like that. And I had a wonderful job, and I had a booth in one of the fanciest hotels in Johannesburg, and I would have a uniform and a car and driver who would go to the airport and pick up these important people and bring them into the city and discuss with them their trip to the game reserve, because everybody went to Kruger National Park, to see the animals. Mm-hmm. So one particular occasion, I'd been working on this file for maybe 6 months. Dr. and Mrs. Cy Stein and Mrs. Florence Perlman from Manhattan. And they came, I greeted them at the airport, and we're driving into town, and I say, do any of you have to do anything before you leave for safari tomorrow? Mrs. Perlman had a toothache, and Mrs. Stein said, there's only one thing I have to do in Johannesburg, and I have to do it. My best friend in America has a cousin in Johannesburg, and she has asked me to contact him. I said, well, no problem. As soon as we get back to the hotel, I'll make the call and we'll get through to this person. And I said, what's the name? And she said, it's a Mr. Ted Shapiro.
Wait,
and I said, Mrs. Stein, I don't know if you heard my name, but my name is Colleen Shapiro, which, by the way, was a very funny name, Colleen Elizabeth Shapiro. I was always saying, no, I am Jewish, really, because people didn't believe it. Right. But anyway, so I said to her, and there are 55,000 Jews in Johannesburg, and I know 54,995, and there's one Ted Shapiro. It's my dad. So when I got back to the hotel, I called my dad at work, and I said, Daddy, you won't believe it, but I brought in this lady, and she's got regards for you. And he said, oh, I forgot to tell you, when they come back from their trip, please invite them to our house for Shabbat. So I said, fine. So they went to the game reserve, had a wonderful time, and the following Friday night, they came to us for Shabbat. So Mrs. Florence Perlman, who was a widow, and Dr. and Mrs. Simon Stein, and my parents and my sister and I, we had this wonderful Shabbat dinner at home. And my father was always enthralled by his American relatives because, you know, my grandparents eloped. They were sort of the black sheep, but a lot of the brothers and sisters went to America. So I had a lot of relatives here. Mm-hmm. So my mom gave them hundreds of pictures of the whole family for the relatives in America. They left, we said goodbye, hugged and kissed, bye. Okay. That was the end. I went back to work. About 2 months later, I get a letter. Hello, my name is Philip Sandler, and my aunt, my mother's sister, Rose Stein, was just in Johannesburg, South Africa, and she met you and your family. And she thought, and she showed me a picture of you, and she thought maybe I should write to you, contact you. And I said, okay. I mean, you know, this was a gentleman. He was 10 years older than me. He was working in Washington, D.C. As it was America, it sounded, you know, quite glamorous. And I started corresponding with him. Didn't really mention that much to my dad, but, you know, I was writing to him regularly. And he offered to come to South Africa. And I said, you know, please, no, don't. We'll just correspond. Anyway, my father decided he wanted to send me to the relatives in Glen Cove, Long Island, the ones who had given regards. And so the following August, my father sent me for 1 month from the 14th of August, 1964 to the 14th of September, 1964 to the relatives. Well, of course, the very first thing I did was meet Philip Sandler.
Right.
And it was the New York World's Fair at the time. It was a very interesting, wonderful time in America. My aunt lived in this huge house in Glen Cove, Long Island. She lived far better than my parents lived in South Africa. And it was a wonderful month. And during that month, my new friend Philip asked me to marry him.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, there's no way. I said, my father would kill me. I said, my father is already planning that I'm going to marry the son of one of his great golf buddies at his club, Houghton Golf Club in Johannesburg. I mean, there's not even a vague chance. Look, it's been a wonderful summer fling and, you know, bye-bye.
Right.
But he persisted and persisted. And eventually I said, okay, we can get engaged, but you can't tell anybody. I mean, this is private between you and I. Cut a very long story short, I called my dad and I said, Daddy, I've met a gentleman in America and, you know, cousin Eva knows him, whatever. I'd like to stay and work for a few months. So I would prefer not to come home on the 14th of September.
Right.
And my father said, my dear, I don't know which word you didn't hear, but you will be home on the 14th of September, or I will come and get you and it won't be pretty. So I left and I told him, bye-bye, it's, you know, been wonderful. And it was a tearful goodbye. And I left and I came back to South Africa. And he said, don't worry, I'm coming to fetch you. He said, I'm 30 years old. You know, I've had a lot of opportunity to date and I finally found who I want to marry and I'm coming to get you. And I said, well, you don't know my dad. He didn't. Anyway, so he came to South Africa with all his earnings. He had accumulated 6 weeks of leave. He worked for the government. He was an engineer, graduate of Columbia University, and he was working for the Defense Department in Washington, D.C. He took his 6 weeks, he arrived, and the day he arrived, he said to me, I want to marry you. I've got to be back at work on the 15th of January, 1964. I want us to honeymoon in Europe. We have to get married by the end of the year, and you're coming back with me. And I kept saying, you're dreaming. And then my dad met him and wasn't pretty. I mean, he said, you know, he said, forget it. I mean, he wasn't even interested in entertaining the thought. But he was here. He was in, and he stayed in a hotel for 6 weeks. He basically stayed in a hotel. Anyway, every day he said to me, please come, go leave with me, please, 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 every day. Finally, it's December 21st and we are playing Scrabble. And I said to him, you know, you're driving me crazy. I just don't know what to do between my dad and you. It's just like unbelievable. I said, I tell you what, make 62 points on this one word. And I will go to my mom and I will say, Mommy, I'm getting married. So he was very smart. He made 64 points, I think, on the word. And I kept my word and I got up and I went to my mom.
Wait a minute. Would you,
honestly,
if he couldn't have come up with the word, you weren't going to marry him?
I'm not sure.
Oh God, you would.
I don't know. And unfortunately, my sweet dear husband, after 39 years of marriage, died in 2004. So you can't ask him.
Right.
But maybe I would have. I don't know. You have to understand, it's not like America where you talk back to your parents.
I know, I get it. That's what I'm saying. Like, you had to have made up your mind that you were going to do this.
Yeah, I think so.
But still, that's an amazing story.
They didn't know until the 21st.
Fair enough.
At which time my mother sort of panicked. Anyway, my father finally acquiesced. I think he muttered under his breath, you know, the truth is he loved me dearly and he really didn't want me to go. And I mean, I can understand now.
Right.
So not only my children, but my grandchildren, I have a granddaughter of 27. If she said, I'm leaving and I'm going to live in Israel or Australia, I would be mighty upset.
Even if it's Israel or Australia and places which you know are worthy, great places, it's just sad to see them go, for sure.
Exactly. And my father knew that Philip could support me. I mean, he had already accumulated quite a bit of money, and he had a lot of potential. And anyway,
he blew it all on 6 weeks of hotels, though, I think is
right. That's true. He might not have had as much, although
he had a lot of money, but then it was all gone by the time that trip was over. Do you know that, by the way? Your dad also probably had to figure out a way to tell the son of his golf buddy that that the wedding was off.
Yep, absolutely. But I think they worked that out. And in 8 days, my parents made a wedding for me.
Oh my God.
In 8 days, I had a dress, which was lovely. I mean, I didn't really care, but it was very simple, round, whatever, and a lace bolero. My mother's dressmaker made it. And we went to the printer actually for invitations. And we made a card and they gave us the envelopes. We went home, we wrote the addresses on the envelope. The next morning we came and we stuck them and we mailed them. So people actually got an invitation. I'd worked in this wonderful hotel and the restaurant manager was Mr. Giganti, and he gave me the ballroom was dark on a Tuesday night, and we were married on December 29th, 1964. And we left South Africa on the 30th of December, 1964. I don't know how I did that. I left my life in a week.
That's incredible.
And yeah, it was.
That is incredible.
Just about, yeah, incredible.
Oh my God. We have.
I wouldn't have done it now. I mean, there's no way.
We have 5 or 10 minutes. We can talk longer. So tell me a little bit about how Judaism has changed for you since you've been in America.
Well, I came to this country and, you know, a lot was very, very difficult for me. People made fun of how I talked. I would say pavement, they would say sidewalk, I would say nappy, they said diaper, I said rubber, they said eraser. I mean, and it was always hee hee hee.
Right.
So it was difficult. However, the one thing that gave me security was the strength of my father and my religion. And every single Shabbat, we did the candles and we had a challah, and I thought of my parents, even though the time difference was so different, it gave me stability. It gave me a great deal of stability. And we really didn't join a shul until our children were of the age to go to shul.
Right.
So my religion was always my grounding. It meant a tremendous amount to me. The love that I think I was given in South Africa also meant a lot to me. And things were not easy. I mean, when it was very, very difficult, I have to admit. And I will just tell you something kind of funny. About 3 weeks after I came back to America, I wrote to my mother because we didn't do anything other than write. And I said, you know, Mom, I've made a very big mistake. I think I want to come back to South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And my mother wrote to me, my darling, I fled Nazi Germany. You begged, you made your bed in America, and that's where you stay.
That is incredible. And she's right. It's like, so easy for us to complain because, oh, they're laughing at me because I say rubber instead of eraser or nappy instead of diaper. But like, let's put this in perspective about what.
So I stayed and I got pregnant and I got happy. And, life became wonderful in America, and I made the correct decision. I was married to a wonderful, wonderful man. Thank God we raised 3 remarkable children, all 3 actually who married Jews and have continued the religion in their homes. My one daughter doesn't have children, but the other 2 have. And
Where do your kids live?
I beg your pardon?
Where do your children live?
My daughter Robin and her husband Jonathan live in Potomac, and they have 4 daughters.
Wow.
My daughter
4
Samantha, yes, my daughter Samantha is the horsewoman, and she lives in Rockville. She's not married, but she has 11 horses, and she's a lawyer.
Oh my God.
And my son Greg lives in Miami with his wife Randy, and they have 2 daughters. So I have 6 granddaughters.
And you were one of 2 girls.
Yes.
And
and my husband had 1 sister. Yeah.
That the females run in your family.
I'm waiting for grandsons-in-law, please God, one day. And if anybody has a wonderful 27-year-old grandson, whoop, I shouldn't say that.
Well, hey, it's now public. It's out there. You know what? I think I feel like this has been an extraordinary conversation, and we could talk for a lot more time about America. But the fact is that the richness of your experiences in South Africa are really, I mean, it's not to say what makes you, because there's so much that makes you who you are, far more than just growing up. But what makes your story so remarkably unique and extraordinary are those experiences that you had growing up. And I'm so grateful that you spent this time talking with me about them. I mean, I've loved these stories. People are going to go crazy when they hear this video. They're going to love this because your stories are incredible. They're incredible.
Oh, Rabbi Goldstein, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. But I do want to just end by saying one thing.
Good.
I'm very, very fortunate because, as you know, I was widowed in 2004. I was just 60. And, I had no idea how my life would continue after that. But I always had faith, and I always believed I was young enough to maybe have another life. And I didn't date for a long time, but about 7 years ago, I met Ivan Kaplan, who is a member of your show.
Yeah.
And also on JDate, we connected, and the rest is history. We now live in a lovely house in Annapolis, and I'm a member of Temple Beth Shalom, and I am very happy.
Oh, it's a match made in heaven. I think that it's I'm first of all, I'm so delighted to hear that, of course, but thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can't begin to tell you just how grateful I am for this time that you spent with me.
I'm just as grateful.
It's extraordinary. Your stories are extraordinary. I mean, your life is extraordinary. And they like bring a smile to my face. I mean, because it's fun, it's interesting, it's new, it's remarkable. I just bring a smile to my face. So thank you for taking this time with me. And I cannot wait to I'm going to post this on our YouTube, but we may not get the word out for a few days. So, if the word, so I'll send you the link. You're welcome to send it to anybody you want to. We may not start advertising it just for a few more days because we're just trying to get things a little bit organized here. But know that this has been such a joy for me, and I thank you so much.
Oh, it's my total pleasure, and I've loved it too, Rabbi. And you're a wonderful rabbi, and you have a marvelous congregation. I'm so proud to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.